When it comes to literature, there are names that rank among the very biggest. The Scarlet Letter, 1984, Moby Dick, Wuthering Heights, Hamlet, all written by authors who may have been battling some of the very worst ailments ever known, from tuberculosis to mercury poisoning. In a new book, Dr. John Ross of Boston's Brigham and Women's Hospital looks at how disease may have infected the lives and works of 10 famous writers. It's called Shakespeare's Tremor and Orwell's Cough, and Dr. John Ross joins me now. Welcome to you.
Thanks, Jeff.
You sort of stumbled upon this, I gather, from when you were doing a class about syphilis. Is that how it all started?
That's right. We had a syphilis outbreak in Boston a number of years ago, and I did a PowerPoint talk on syphilis for the medical staff, and I decided to spruce it up with some Shakespeare quotations. So I dusted off my old Riverside Shakespeare, leafed through it, and was amazed at the amount of references to syphilis that were present there.
Well, tell us more. So you started looking into Shakespeare. Let's look at that one as a case study.
Yeah, so this got me curious. So I went through and read all the plays of Shakespeare and counted up all the references to syphilis. And in fact, if you compare Shakespeare to his contemporaries, there's a vast amount greater references to syphilis than, say, if you compare him to, say, Christopher Marlowe. So other people have made this observation. D.H. Lawrence said that he was convinced that some of the shock and horror that Shakespeare displays in the tragedies arose from his consciousness of syphilis. But I took that another step further, drawing on some biographical information about Shakespeare, contemporary gossip about Shakespeare, including about his rather lascivious love life, and some contemporary innuendo that he may have had venereal disease. I took a leap from there to consider what effects might have happened to Shakespeare had he been treated for syphilis at that time.
So this is circumstantial evidence, right? Because we don't have the actual.
Circumstantial. There's no smoking gun.
And you start looking at his signature and seeing that's the tremor notion, right?
So we have 6 samples of Shakespeare's signature over the years, and his handwriting deteriorates markedly over the years. And in fact, there's one scholar who has noted that there's an increasing number of textual errors that creep into the early editions of Shakespeare's plays as he gets older, which he's hypothesized that this is due to a deterioration in his handwriting. If you look at the last samples of Shakespeare's handwriting that we have, he has a really marked tremor present on his signatures.
To move further in time, you have the case of the Bronte sisters and tuberculosis. And you're writing about the impact of illness on, say, Wuthering Heights.
One of the truly impressive things about Wuthering Heights is that everybody dies of tuberculosis in this novel. And to the point where it seems a bit facetious. But this actually reflects a contemporary reality of Victorian England, that there was a tremendous death toll from tuberculosis in Victorian England on the order of 1% per year. And in fact, all 6 of the Bronte children would eventually die of tuberculosis, in some cases aggravated by substance abuse, in the case of Branwell Bronte. But if you look at Jane Eyre, at the beginning of Jane Eyre, Jane is sent to this horrible school called Lowood School, where there's an outbreak of tuberculosis that kills off a number of the children. And that actually reflects a historical event that happened with the Bronte family. 4 of the Bronte daughters were sent to the school, and the 2 oldest ones died. The ones who survived were Charlotte and Emily, but they may have contracted TB at that time, which later recurred and led to their deaths.
One of the things that keeps coming through in all these stories is how medicine has changed, right? I mean, some of the awfulness, the treatment that many of the famous writers have gone through.
It's very true. So it's been said with a lot of truth, I think, that up until 1850, you were probably more likely to die as a result of going to a physician than if you had just stayed home and had your family provide nursing care to you. So the many horrible things that were done to people as a result of medical dogma at the time included things like making horribly ill people take things to make them have diarrhea and vomiting, which would make them more dehydrated if they had a disease like typhoid fever, and a variety of very nasty medicines that I talk a little bit about in the book, which include such things as mummy, which was actually ground up human bones and meat that was given to people as a therapy.
Lovely. How does that feel as a present-day doctor looking back?
You know, it makes us grateful for modern medicine. One of the other things that I talk about in the book is the use of heavy metals as a therapy. So this came in the Renaissance with a guy named Paracelsus, who was an alchemist. And so as a result of his influence, things like mercury, lead, and arsenic, which are all heavily toxic heavy metals, became used as routine therapies.
Now, we can't go through all these case studies, but some of them involve mental conditions and mental illnesses. Give me an example.
a great many of these writers had suffered from either bipolar disorder, in the case of Herman Melville and Jack London, or major depressive disorder, which affected a number of writers, including Charlotte Bronte, George Orwell. In Melville's case, I think you can make an argument that his bipolar disorder really affected his writing career. So if you look at the natural history of bipolar disorder, typically people have manic episodes early in the course of illness where their brain is on fire and they're writing like crazy. So if they're writers. So Melville, when he was younger, wrote one book called Marty, in which he was clearly manic, and the book about halfway through goes completely nuts. But he was in a hypomanic state when he wrote Moby Dick, and I think a lot of the brilliance of Moby Dick results from the fact that he writes this book in this state of barely controlled mania where he's able to focus incredibly on this book, but he's also sitting at this desk 16 hours a day and writing like a fiend. Later in the course of Melville's career, he becomes more depressed and his writing becomes darker and darker. He writes this horribly depressed novel called The Confidence Man, which is the last novel that he writes in his lifetime. And then he essentially, his writing career is over. And then he resuscitates himself as a poet. He's able to, even though he's very depressed, he's able to, the smaller scale of poetry enables him to conserve his energies.
Let me ask you finally, because I'm curious, because you told me your undergraduate degree is English literature. You clearly love literature as well as medicine. In doing this detective work, you know, and scholarly and medical detective work, did it change your feeling about the writers or about these books? Did you like them more or less, or were you able to just read them as literature still?
Having the background in medicine and literature enables me to have more sympathy for them as both writers and patients, and a greater appreciation for the tremendous amount of suffering that they underwent and the magnitude of their achievement despite suffering from mental and physical disabilities. Is really incredible what they were able to achieve despite their manifest handicaps.
And I guess, I mean, would a hope from a book like this be to humanize them more for us? I mean, what do you want us to take away from this?
It humanizes them, I think, and it makes them real people. You know, if there are people out there that are in healthcare, maybe this is a way to get them interested in literature through the back door, so to speak.
All right, the book is Shakespeare's Tremor and Orwell's Cough. Dr. John Ross, thanks so much.
Thank you.